just celebrated my 10-year anniversary at LinkedIn. Woo! Oh my gosh. It's probably everywhere. So random, but got your attention, right? So my team recently asked me what was my favorite part of my LinkedIn life over these past 10 years. And my immediate first thought was them, my amazing teammates. And of course, I also thought of all the people that I've had the pleasure to work with at LinkedIn and all those relationships that I have developed over the years. Those relationships are 100% why I've been here for 10 years and hope to stay for 10 more. Our core value, relationships matter, has never felt stronger to me. And my guess is, or my hope is, that this core value resonates with you as well. I'm hoping that as you're listening to this, that you're thinking of all the incredible relationships that you have developed here at LinkedIn and in life in general. You know, that's the stuff that makes life on this planet so special. So welcome to the speaker series. I'm Rochelle Diamond. I'm on our employee experience team. I have the privilege of running this speaker series, which is all about bringing in inspiring ideas and diverse, innovative thinkers to make you more productive and successful. And today we're going to do that by learning how to develop truly exceptional relationships. I could not be more excited to introduce today's guest. Carole Robin, otherwise known as the Queen of Touchy-Feely, was the Dorothy J. King Lecturer in Leadership at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. This is where she taught the Interpersonal Dynamics course, which is affectionately known as Touchy-Feely, hence her name, the Queen of Touchy-Feely. She co-wrote the book Connect, Building Exceptional Relationships with Family, Friends, and Colleagues with David Bradford, so people beyond the class could benefit from their incredible material. The Touchy-Feely course has been the most popular elective at GSB for the past 5 decades. It's a completely experiential class where students are put into groups and they meet for 3 to 5 hour sessions weekly outside of class, where they then put the concept they've learned in class into practice. And I have heard over and over again from people I know who've attended this course that this is by far the most transformative course they've ever taken, and the one that they actually still use years and years after completing their MBA. More recently, Carole's co-founded Leaders in Tech. It's a nonprofit that helps tech leaders build high-performing and culturally healthy organizations by teaching these same concepts. We are so lucky to have Tomer Cohen, our Chief Product Officer, here to lead the conversation with Carole about how we can be more effective and fulfilled in life and in work by developing exceptional relationships through authenticity, vulnerability, and honesty. Tomer was fortunate enough to take Carole's class at Stanford's GSB, and I know he's very excited to reunite with Carole today. So before we dive into the event today, I have a special ask of you that ties in beautifully with our topic today. We are currently collecting your top 1 LinkedIn stories from the year. Now, these could include stronger partnerships across the business, fresh and creative problem solving, or thinking more cross-functionally. Some of the high-impact stories will be featured in our June 7th company updates video. So please submit those at go/1LinkedIn stories by tomorrow. Also, during this event, you can enter in your questions into the chat, and Tomer will weave those throughout the conversation. So now, without further ado, let's put our hands together for a virtual round of applause and very warm welcome to Tomer and our honored guest, Carole Robin. Yay!
That's awesome. Nothing like confetti to get us started here.
Yeah.
Carole, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to host you at LinkedIn today.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be here with LinkedIn, where I know many people, and I'm really thrilled to be here with you.
That's awesome. Personally, this is a special moment for me. As Rochelle mentioned, for everybody watching, Carole was my Touchy-Feely professor at Stanford. And I came to Stanford directly from Israel. It was kind of my first stop coming to kind of graduate school here. And I had a big desire to develop my soft skills. And I was very fortunate to take part in multiple programs that Carole led. So from coaching to interpersonal dynamics. And as people mentioned, that was the Touchy-Feely course. And to say that Carole's teachings and classes had a profound impact on me would be a massive understatement. And I would easily say that more than a decade after, I still carry many of the learnings, memories, and I practice a lot. And as Rachel mentioned, like Carole's classes are literally like some of the most sought after in Stanford University. I would even dare to say many students choose Stanford GSB because of the interpersonal dynamics curriculum. It has such a big impact on people's lives. And Carole, I was reading your book. I was continuously starting to reminisce on moments from the school, and especially from T groups, which was kind of the training groups, which is a group of like roughly 10 plus people who meet weekly in a very intense setting to train together. And for those who haven't had a chance to read the book yet, I highly recommend you do so. We've had more than 500 employees already get a copy of the book, this one, which is incredible. And there's still copies left. I can't recommend it enough. If you have read it, please write a review and spread the word. This could make such a big impact in people's lives. And hopefully today's session will give you a kind of a beginning of a notion of why, so you can go deeper in the book. So Carole, to kick us off, we have a LinkedIn tradition.
Yeah.
And then when we have new people kind of join us here, we ask them to share something which is not on the LinkedIn profile. And we'd love to continue the transition with you. So if you don't mind, we'd love to learn something about you that we can't find on your profile on LinkedIn.
Sure, I'm happy to. So one thing that is not on my LinkedIn profile is that my family is my biggest value and my biggest source of joy. This is a picture at my son's wedding in 2019. And that would obviously be my husband at one end and my daughter at the other. And my daughter officiated that wedding. And that made that the happiest day of my life by far, until about a month and a half, couple months ago, when my son and daughter-in-law brought a baby into their lives and into our lives. And so now that's competing with whether or not their wedding day was my happiest moment.
That's awesome. Congrats on being a grandma. That's a big deal. Starting a new relationship there.
Yeah.
Interestingly, family is also my top value. We did in executive staff, we did a values exercise recently, and it was my number one value. So it was awesome to hear we share the same number one value.
And here we've known all these years, and we didn't know that about each other. You see, there's never how we can be learning about each other.
I love it. It's not surprising to me, though. So I love learning that about you. So when you first shared with me that you were working on the book, it was about to come out, I must tell you, I thought to myself, whoa, that's a tough book to write. Because I was like trying to translate those classroom teachings into paper. And I was like, that's really hard to transfer into paper. But after reading the book, you've done an exceptional job. So I would love to understand first, maybe for all of us, why did you write the book? You have an amazing practice right now. You're oversubscribed. Why did you do the book?
Well, first of all, great question. I've asked myself that a lot in the last couple of months after the release of the book, and certainly in the middle of trying to write it. So what happened was that we were approached by Penguin Random House, who came to us and said, so let's see, you've got this life-changing class that students for decades, thousands of students for decades have said, was worth the price of tuition, which, as you might imagine, our colleagues really loved. And the only people who get to learn these skills and competencies that are transformational are the ones that are lucky enough to go to the Stanford Graduate School of Business. How is that okay with you? And we'd been approached many times, David and I, individually and collectively, and we'd always said no, precisely for the reason you just said, Tomer, which is, boy, it's really hard to learn about how to be better interpersonally by reading about it. You actually have to go engage with other people to get better at it. But this editor from Penguin Random House really spoke to us when he said, well, don't you want to democratize this? Don't you want to make this available to a lot more people than the privileged, lucky few? And so then David and I said, okay. And by the way, it took us 4 years to write this book for precisely the reasons you've talked about. It was like being pregnant for 3.5 years and in labor for 6 months. And then the book finally launched. And, for the last 3 months, I have felt like a single mother wondering where the hell my village is to help me raise it. So that would be my metaphor for the whole journey. If I had it to do over again, I probably would still do it over again. I think the jury is still out for me on whether or not we're going to really get it out into the world in the way that I want to see it out there. And, if I could give hundreds of thousands of books away, if I had that kind of money, I would, because that's how much I believe in what it's trying to bring to the world. But yeah, that's the story.
Well, it's such a gift. I'm a big believer, so I'm just grateful you did it, and I'm sure many others will be, probably more than you will ever know. So maybe we can jump right into it. So the book starts with the notion of exceptional relationships.
Yep.
And it's about how to develop them. One of our cultural core values, and Reed wrote one of the endorsements for your book, and this is how we started the company, was on the notion that relationships matter. And that's actually unique to LinkedIn. I don't recall any other company saying that has a value for them.
Yeah.
I want to start off slightly academically a little bit, which is, how do you describe a relationship to be exceptional? What's an exceptional relationship? How do I know if I feel it? Do I see it? How does it apply to work?
Yeah.
Can we get all of them to be exceptional?
Yeah. So, when we started, one of the things we had to do is we had to try to figure out precisely what the answer to that question was, which was what is happening? First of all, relationships exist on a continuum. At one end of the continuum is contact with no connection. At the other end of the continuum is what we came to call exceptional. Along the way, you can't get to exceptional without at least getting to strong and robust and functional. So that was what the course delivered to our students, was the skills and competencies necessary to move along this continuum. And what it takes to move along the continuum are essentially 6 dimensions, if you will. One is a willingness to be more fully yourself, and make it okay for the other person to be more fully themselves, i.e., don't hide behind a spun image. And we can get deeper into any of these, but I just want to run past them really quickly for those of you who haven't read the book yet. So if you're both going to be more willing to be more fully yourselves, you're also both going to have to be willing to be somewhat vulnerable. Now, we're not talking about you've got to say everything to everybody, and we can come back and talk about that. But willingness to be vulnerable is an important element of moving along this continuum. You have to trust that whatever you do disclose to each other won't be used against you. You have to be honest with each other. You have to learn how to deal with conflict productively. An exceptional relationship, or any relationship that has moved along the continuum, is not one that never has any trouble or any challenges. Conflict is inevitable, but it's one where we've learned how to deal with conflict productively. And the last element is that you're both committed to your own and each other's growth and development. And when we stopped and thought about what happens in these touchy-feely courses, this is what students experiment with, learn to do, and as a result, move all of their relationships along that continuum. Every single one of them does not become exceptional. And to your point, Tomer, we are not advocating you try to turn every single one of your relationships into exceptional. A, that would be exhausting. B, it's unrealistic. And C, it's unnecessary. What we do want to do is we want to equip people to get there with a handful, if that's what they want. But at the very least, equip them with what they need to get to the robust, functional, healthy, productive relationship, which is which is less common than I kind of wish it was, both at work and at home. The reason that we wrote the book, in addition to students, alums now coming back 10, 15 years later to tell us how it changed their life, and they just became an executive VP or they just became a CEO and they owe it all to what they learned. We also hear things like, I'm pretty sure what I learned from you just saved my marriage. And we learn, I just reconciled my relationship with my really good friend who I hadn't talked to for 6 months because I went and dusted off my notes and decided to use some of what I'd learned. So the fact is that these skills and competencies are what equip you with what you need to move along the continuum. And no, we don't advocate you try to convert every relationship into exceptional. And I do think exceptional relationships are possible at work, but they are more difficult to achieve at work because there are power differentials in organizations. Sometimes there's a lack of alignment with regard to, that whole committed to your own and the other's growth and learning. Sometimes those compete a little bit, but it doesn't mean they're impossible. And the book does talk about that in part 3. Part 2, one of the metaphors we use in the book is that to get just to that functional, robust, really strong relationship is like climbing from the foothills to an upper meadow. And it takes work and it takes skill. And sometimes you get to the upper meadow and you're pretty happy in the upper meadow. It's beautiful, sun is shining, there's flowers out. The peak looks even harder, even steeper. Stormy clouds are starting to build. Yeah, maybe you don't want to hike all the way to the top. But and so that's why the book is in part 2 takes these multiple pairs that you follow through the book to the meadow. They all get to the meadow. And then some of them get to the top and some of them don't. And we talk about why and how, and it's not a good or bad thing. It just is.
I love that notion of the continuum and the elements. We're actually going to talk about a few of those elements in our discussion today. And to your point around relationships being, at work, with family, with your partners, there's also a notion with yourself. You're really understanding yourself, understanding your emotion. And it also comes out of the book really strongly there. I want to start with the first element you talked about, which is bring your full self in a way, or being authentically yourself. And vulnerability is a big part of that. And you call it out in the book multiple times and you go very deep into it. And I remember when I read the Culture Code by Danny Coyle, he talks a lot about vulnerability for organizations being a key tenet, almost like the first ingredient for strong cultures. So you actually take it deeper in the book, in my opinion, and you kind of showcase it from that atomic unit of a relationship. So I would love to learn, maybe start with the role of feelings there, but also go to the disclosure part, vulnerability part. And then I know for myself, there's always felt like there was a chicken and egg notion where if you want to build trust, you have to be vulnerable. But sometimes to be vulnerable, you want to have some trust.
Yes.
So that's always felt like, catch-22 a little bit of how do I make it happen? Yeah. So would love to kind of get your thoughts and advice there.
Sure. Tons of stuff to unpack there. So first of all, in order to deepen a relationship, you have to be open to being more known. So, and self-disclosure creates more opportunities for us to connect. The more we know about each other, the more chance we have to connect. And there's a cost to non-disclosure because, by the way, in the absence of data, people make stuff up. This is one of the things you learned, Tomer, in class, which is, if I don't tell you anything about me, you like to make sense. Human beings like to make sense of other human beings. So if I don't tell you, you'll make stuff up. And by the way, the higher up you are in an organization and the more differentiated a role you're in, the more stuff people will make up about you. So you're better off actually telling them what you're thinking and how you're feeling, because they will fill in the blanks, even if you don't. And now let's come back to your point about feelings. So the course is called Touchy-Feely for a reason, because there's a big emphasis placed on feelings and talking about feelings, because most of us have been socialized, especially in business, to leave feelings out of it, right? You got to be rational and pragmatic, and there's no place for feelings. Now, personally, I don't know how you inspire anybody as a leader with no feelings. I certainly don't know how you connect with anybody without any feelings. But the fact is, most of us have, our ability to even access them has sometimes atrophied, and express them even more, which is why in the appendix of the book and part of the syllabus in the course was a vocabulary of feelings. Like, how sad is it that we had to develop a vocabulary of feelings because people just didn't even know what it was that they were feeling, but it helped.
I moved from 5 feelings I knew I had to tens and hundreds. So thank you. That was a big shift for me, moving from like, I'm sad, I'm angry, happy, to a lot more.
Yeah. It's a lot more nuanced than that, isn't it? So feelings actually are what give meaning to facts. So if you think about this, if I tell you that I went ziplining with my family, it's a fact. You've learned a little something about me. It certainly didn't feel very risky. And there is risk to disclosure and to being vulnerable. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But so it's kind of a throwaway fact, kind of interesting. But if I tell you I went ziplining with my family and it was exhilarating, you've learned more about me. On the other hand, if I tell you I went ziplining and I was terrified and I only went because I felt coerced and I didn't want to be left out, which, by the way, is the truth, not the exhilarating part until much later, you've learned a lot more about me. And maybe it's been a little bit riskier to tell you that, but not super risky. I don't think you're going to think so much less of me if I share that. And to your point, Tomer, feelings actually also indicate the intensity of an experience. Am I annoyed? Am I irritated? Am I angry? Am I furious? Those are different feelings. It's like treble and bass in music. It sounds weird when you only have one. But let's go back to how vulnerable it makes us feel to disclose, especially feelings. When people think of when they hear self-disclosure, they think, oh, I got to tell you my deepest, darkest secret, or I got to tell you something that's illegal, immoral, or fattening. That's not necessarily true. We're talking about letting yourself be known in this moment. What is going on for you right here, right now, which often involves feelings. But you may recall this. Students used to say, "Ugh, but that feels scary. Feels risky." And so we came up with this 15% rule. Think of your comfort zone as the stuff that you say without thinking twice about it. Think of your danger zone as stuff you would never in a million years consider sharing. And then think about this zone in the middle, which is your zone of learning. And students used to say, yeah, but the minute I'm outside my comfort zone, how do I know I'm not in my danger zone? How do I know I'm in my learning zone? So we used to say, try 15% outside your comfort zone, just a little bit. You'll know if you're feeling just a wee bit uncomfortable. So if I were to give you an example of that, we just talked about the fact that I have a brand new grandson, which is very exciting. Doesn't feel any way outside my comfort zone, to tell you that. I could add that it's a pretty good thing that I have a new grandson in my life, because I'm really grateful that I get to, in some way, spread out my obsessive compulsive neuroses among a grandson, a book that I just launched, and my business. This is good for everybody in my life. That feels 15%. Doesn't feel super risky. If I wanted to take it one step further, I would tell you that, if you really knew me, you'd know that every time I do one of these talks, I worry about whether or not I'm really doing justice to David's and my life's work. And if you knew me, you'd know that I'm kind of a mess right now because my husband and I of 36 years just moved out of our house that we've lived in for 35 years in Palo Alto and into a condo in San Francisco as part of repotting. And it sounded like a much better idea when we came up with it than it's feeling right now. So that took about 90 seconds, right? I just shared where I am right here, right now. And I'm hoping that what it demonstrated was my willingness to allow you all of you on the call, to know me just a little bit better and perhaps set up a dynamic where it makes it easier for you to now allow yourself to be known by me. Because, by the way, the more I hold my cards close to my vest, the more you're going to hold yours. And then after a while, we've got something called progressive impoverishment. Neither one of us knows anything about the other, much less feels connected to each other. So I do want to underscore one other thing, which is, and it's back to what I said earlier. We're talking about appropriate authenticity here. We're not talking about full disclosure, everything, TMI, because you don't want to freak the other person out. You don't want to freak yourself out. That's what we talk about 15% of the time. By the way, an interesting thing happens. If I disclose 15% outside my comfort zone and things are okay, then I have a new safety zone that's a little bigger. And now maybe maybe I'm willing to disclose 15% beyond that. And that, Tomer, is what you experienced in group. That every time each of you took a little risk, your comfort zones became a little bit bigger. And every time your comfort zones got a little bit bigger, then you could experiment beyond that. And that's the nature of disclosure. And disclosure is reciprocal. So that is how this being known and getting to know the other person works. Appropriate authenticity, by the way, I'm the VP of marketing, and that's the third month in a row we've lost share. It might be very vulnerable and authentic for me to stand up in front of everybody and say, so that's the third month in a row we've lost share. I have no idea why. I'm feeling really insecure. I'm not even sure I should be in this job. That would be inappropriate authenticity. And that is not what we're actually advocating. But it would be appropriate and powerful for me to stand up and say, so third month in a row, we've lost share. Those of you who've been looking probably already noticed that. I've got some ideas about what's going on. I'm sure I don't have them all. I'm not entirely sure what we should do, but I've never needed all of you more. That is both vulnerable and effective. In fact, the research shows that leaders that are willing to be vulnerable, as long as it's not about a core competence, create the higher performing organizations. And they create a place where people admit mistakes, which makes us feel vulnerable, where people are willing to talk about what's going on for them, which makes us feel vulnerable. And where people don't think they have to have the answer, but instead believe that they need to create a place where the answer can be found, even if they're not the one that provides it.
So this ties really well. There's a question in the stream from Alejandra who talks about, how do managers balance vulnerability while still kind of exuding strength and keeping the team together? I think there's a notion that vulnerable sometimes can be perceived as a weakness. And I've learned a long time ago that vulnerable is actually very courageous.
Yes.
And it could allow teams actually coalesce together.
Yes.
So can you, there's a whole, we have to debunk that myth a little bit, but can you talk about it a little bit?
Absolutely. You're right. When we reach this module in the class and I say, so what are the first things that come to mind when I say vulnerability? Weakness is, number one, weakness, being taken advantage of, all kinds of negative connotations. And then inevitably somebody says something like what you just said, Tomer, courage, strength. If I am courageous enough to admit that I don't have all the answers, I actually am more powerful and I am stronger. The more I am willing to be vulnerable, again, as long as it's not about a core competence, the more likely it is that other people will follow me. The question that I used to ask in all the leadership courses I taught was, the question I want you to sit in for a year is, why should somebody follow you? Not why did somebody follow Sheryl Sandberg or not follow her? Or why does somebody follow, Elon Musk or not follow him? Why should somebody follow you? And this comes back to, boy, if they don't know you, they're not going to follow you. Now, let me tie this to a little quick anecdote. In 1975, I went, and this is in the book, but so sorry if it's redundant to those of you who got to this part already. But in 1975, I went to work for a very large industrial automation company, one of the top 50, Fortune 50 companies. I was the first woman hired into a non-clerical job. 1975, and yes, I was old, but it was not the dinosaurs, And I learned really quickly that, boy, if I was going to succeed, I better leave those pesky little feelings at the door. And I was hired as a sales engineer. I was very good at both that and at learning the norms and the rules of the game. And now fast forward 10 years. 10 years later, I'm running a $50 million business unit. I'm at an offsite with my team. And in those days, $50 million was a lot of money. I'm at this offsite with my team, and I get a little excited about something I think we can do. Crickets. I get a little more excited. Crickets. Now I'm like, come on, you guys. And they were all still guys. I did fix that eventually, but at this point, they're all still guys. Come on, you guys. Imagine how cool this could be. And crickets. And then one guy, and I'm like, what's wrong with you? One guy leans over and he says to me, Carole, is that like water in the corner of your eye? Then he says, are you going to cry? But then he says, are you human after all? Are you human after all? And so you know what I said? I said, you don't think I'm effing human, but I don't want to offend anybody. I did use the full expletive. You don't think I'm effing human? I don't think there's anything more important for us to talk about than that. And I tore up our agenda and I said, that's what we're going to talk about. And we spent the next 2 days talking about who we really were, why we were there, what we were hoping we could make happen, how we needed each other. And that's when we became a team. And that's when I became a leader. It was a watershed moment for me. And here's what I learned. What I learned is that I had overlearned. First of all, no place for feelings. Well, I'm sure if I burst out crying, which I did after the guy said, you're human after all. I did. I burst out crying. You don't think I'm effing human? If I burst out crying 2 weeks into the job, 10 years earlier, I would have never gotten to where I was, probably. But I had overlearned. Mark Twain used to say that a cat doesn't sit on a hot stove twice, but it never sits on a cold stove again either. So we internalize these messages about what will happen if we admit mistakes, if we're a little bit vulnerable, if we admit that we don't know, if we feel sad or disappointed, and then guess what? We're no longer seen as human. So I can't think, and we're back to how people make stories up about you. So I don't know if I've fully answered the question from the person in the chat, but one thing I would encourage all of you to do is to remember that we're all works in progress. And things that may have served you, beliefs and assumptions that you hold, come from somewhere. You didn't just make them up. But they may have served you at one time, but they need re-examining periodically. And that's where creating relationships like we're talking about, and back to your point about knowing yourself, Tomer, and how important it is, it takes two to know one. I only know me as much as, especially the impact I have on others, as much as others are willing to tell me. And the last thing I'll say is that in the book, we talk about two antennae, one oriented towards picking up signals on what might be going on for the other person, but the other one, to your point, Tomer, talking about learning to pick up the signals on what's going on for you, being more tuned to your feelings, which, by the way, if you're in the business of just denying feelings and not accessing them, you're also, you're not in touch with what's going on for you. But human beings are leaky. And so no matter how much you think you can hide them or not name them, all human beings have feelings. And the more intense they are, the more important it is to both recognize that we have them and manage them, not suppress them, manage them.
It was very powerful. Kind of bring it all the way to where you started this, because I think that's such a powerful advice for people. I remember doing this, probably did this on the whiteboard for people. I'm not hundreds of times during my career here at LinkedIn. And that notion of like idea of comfort zone, then kind of that like learning zone, that kind of 15%, and that danger zone is just such a powerful construct. I would encourage everybody here to do it from themselves. And then usually what I tell people that I work with is, if you're not finding yourself at least like X percentage of your day in your learning zone, you're not growing.
Yeah.
You're not growing. And it's just and it's personal.
Absolutely. And the picture and the explanation is in the book. And I'll go one step further. If you're not learning and growing, you're dying. If you're a living system and you are not learning and growing, then you are dying. So I would double down on what you just said, Tomer. And I would say that people sometimes are afraid to grow and learn. And that's why they need a heuristic, like try just a little bit. Don't try going. When they teach you when you go to learn how to ski, they don't put you on the double black diamond slope to start. They also don't leave you on the bunny slope. You don't ever become a better skier. And after a while, by the way, it gets really boring and you stop skiing. So same concept.
It's a great point about plateauing and then decreasing, even not even maintaining the same level of competency. There's another great question in the chat, and it's very timely to today, which is about kind of building relationships or even strengthening them during times like this, where people are isolated and they're in their homes. Across just keeping it real, like when we do our surveys in terms of happiness and so on. Obviously, the pandemic had a big impact, and partly it's just the sickness and family and friends, and a big part is also I'm here. There's four walls. I'm glad I could see you, but if this was in person, God, my energy would be probably like 5x, right? It wouldn't be the same level of energy,
right?
And I remember like 3 months ago starting to do like 101s with my team, like walking with and it was just like I came back from those sessions as if somebody just injected me with like energy. It was just night and day. So any thoughts about the past year and how do you work on relationships? Because that feels like there's almost like this ceiling to what you can get from this experience.
Well, I'm not going to deny that in person is always better. And I'm also going to say that one of the things I've noticed over the last year is that being on Hollywood Squares becomes an excuse for foregrounding task and backgrounding relationship. And I've seen it over and over and over again. Because A, it's not as satisfying. B, it's exhausting. And people are trying to juggle a lot. And so what has happened is that we are much more likely to focus our limited time together on task. So if there's ever been a time to double down on everything in the book, it would be now. And let me give you an example. Several of the CEOs in my Leaders in Tech program and some of the executives that are doing some of the other programs that we're now doing in Leaders in Tech have adopted one of our practices in our as the way that we start our Leaders in Tech meetings, which is everybody goes around for 90 seconds and says, if you really knew me right now, in the way I did a little while ago when we were talking about disclosure and vulnerability. If you really knew me right now, you would know. And they time it, and they have to have at least 3 feeling words, and they all have vocabularies of feelings in front of them. And, it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And yeah, maybe those are valuable 10 or 15 minutes, but boy, those teams that are doing that have never felt closer or tighter. In some cases, they've got members that they've never met in person. And it's certainly way better for them to be in that practice every other week if you really knew me right now. And they're always finding out new stuff about each other, and they're always connecting more deeply. So it's think of it as a knob and not a switch. And so there are things you can do to move the knob so that it's more satisfying and a little more energizing. And there's some things that happen just naturally when you're together that you actually have to go out of your way to intentionally and deliberately introduce, like if you really knew me activities. By the way, I'd say the same thing goes for feedback. People have a hard enough time with feedback, and they're even less likely to give each other feedback or raise pinches. You and I talked about pinches yesterday, when they're not face-to-face, to the detriment of their relationships.
It's very powerful. I do want to open that up a little bit. I know we're getting short of time, but it's just a powerful concept in a work dynamic. So it would be great if you could define that pinch and crunch so folks can start to kind of understand, like, what does that mean in a relationship manner. And then, when we go to feedback, and there's so much in the book about feedback, and it's so powerful. And I honestly think feedback is one of the most important skills you can have, as both as the receiver of feedback and the sender of feedback.
Yes.
Both very different, distinct, extremely powerful skills. But there's a concept there, which I still remember from the course, which is crossing the net, which has been one of the most powerful concepts I've learned from you. So yes. I would love if you can talk about the pinch and the crunch quickly, but also the crossing the net was such a powerful construct.
Yeah. So real quickly, a pinch is first of all, no matter how good a relationship is, somebody else will do something that's just, That's what we call a pinch, a little pinch. Not a great, big, huge thing. It's a little pinch. And many are really minor and we let them pass. But here we're back to your one of your antenna. If I do something that's kind of annoying, by the way, and you don't tell me, what am I going to do? I'm going to keep doing it. And then if I do it again and you feel a little bit more annoyed, after a while, maybe by the third time, you actually want to say something, or I'm going to keep doing it. And if you don't say something, that pinch becomes a crunch. You get a lot more pissed off than just mildly annoyed when I first did it. So the next time you're feeling a pinch and you think to yourself, it's not worth it, substitute the pronoun, substitute the it for I, you, or we. I'm not worth it. You're not worth it. We're not worth it. And then ask yourself again whether it's not worth raising. Okay? So that's the pinch. Now let's talk about feedback, because when we get to feedback, we're talking about something that's probably a behavior that you engage in on a pretty consistent basis. And by the way, I never use positive and negative feedback. All feedback is data. All data is better than no data, and therefore I never use those two terms. You might have feedback from me on things that you really appreciate about me and strengths that you'd like to see me leverage. And you might have feedback from me about things that are problematic, not positive and negative. It tends to be harder for people to give feedback about things that they're finding challenging or problematic. So here's the model that Tomer wants me to share with you. And by the way, really important, it goes with a picture. It'll make a lot more sense to you if you go to the book and look at the picture. But think of it this way. In any interaction between two people, there are actually three realities. And the best way for me to describe, and it's a model, the best way for me to describe to you is to give you an example. Reality number one is my husband and what his intent is and how he sees a situation and what he thinks. Reality number two is what he does, the actual behavior he engages in. Reality number three is the impact of his behavior on me. Three realities. At any one time, we each only have access to two of those. He knows what his intent is and what he did. Reality number two is the only one we share. If you all watched a video, you'd all say, yeah, that's what happened. He knows what his intent was and what he did. I know what he did and its impact on me. So here's how this works. Let's go back a lot of years to when my husband was a big time executive in the Valley and I was home with an infant and a 2-year-old. I'd chosen to stay home for a while. He would come home from the office and he would sit down on the couch and pick up the newspaper. In those days, people still read newspapers. And I would hear him from the back of the house. I'd come zooming around the corner. I'd say, "Oh my God, you're home. Thank God you're home. You won't believe what happened today. I went to that new nursery school, hasn't even opened yet. Why are we raising kids in Palo Alto? This is crazy." Yeah, 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 yeah. And he would say, mm-hmm. And I'd say, "You're not listening." When I said, "You're not listening," I was in his reality. I wasn't in his head. I didn't know whether he was listening or not. So imagine a metaphorical net between reality number 2, which is his behavior, and his intent and what's going on for him. And you're not listening. By the way, those of you who've been taught messages, I feel that you're not listening is exactly the same thing. Because, and by the way, it has not a single feeling word in it. So you're not listening, or I feel that you're not listening. When you are over the net and you're playing in someone else's court, they are much less likely to want to engage in the conversation. It makes them defensive. So what does he say? "Of course I'm listening. You went to that new nursery school that hasn't even opened yet. You're all worked up about it." Then I would go even further over the net. "How can you not care?" I have now imputed a motive. He didn't say, "I don't care." I have imputed that he doesn't care. And I am over the net. Unless he says, sorry, Carole, I don't care. It wasn't until I learned to give him feedback by staying on my side of the net, i.e. behavior and its impact on me, that we were able to get anywhere. And what that sounded like was, "Honey, when I speak to you and you make no eye contact, and the only response I get is a grunt, and then, I say something like, 'You're not listening,' and then you repeat what I just said without ever looking up, I don't feel heard." He can't say, "Yeah, you do." That's a feeling, by the way, unheard. And when I don't feel heard, I feel distanced, and it makes me sad. And I feel less inclined to be there for you in the ways that I want to be there for you. All of that is on my side of the net. Now, he has more choice. He's got data. Oh, I'm behaving in a way that's resulting in Carole feeling these things. No, he doesn't want me to feel hurt. He doesn't want me to feel distanced. He is, rather than arguing with me about whether he's listening and whether he cares, we can actually get into a problem-solving conversation, which, by the way, is the purpose of feedback. Purpose of feedback is not to change somebody else. It's to move you into a problem-solving conversation if they're engaging in something that is problematic for you. And at that point, he said, "Well, honey, if you want my undivided attention, you're going to have to give me some time to unwind when I get home from the office." And I would say, "Okay, how much time do you need?" And he'd say he said something like, "I don't know, half an hour." "Half an hour? Are you kidding? I've been counting down the minutes for you to get home." How about 5 minutes? We settled on 15. But the point is, we couldn't move into problem solving until I could give him feedback in a way that he could hear and did not make him defensive. And that means staying on your side of the net. So if you remember nothing else and you don't crack the book open, the one thing I want you to remember is when you do fill in behavior, actual behavior, when you arrive repeatedly late to the meeting, when I don't get the report when you said you'd give it to me, when, I hear you say this to this person, but something completely different to that person, I feel, pull out your vocabulary and insert feeling word. I feel worried. I feel upset. I feel disappointed. I feel unsure. And and then remember this part. Well, first of all, not when you arrive late, I feel that you don't care. Sorry, not a feeling, and it's over the net. I feel that you're not committed. Not a feeling, over the net. It's grammatically impossible to express a feeling if you start the phrase with I feel that, or I feel like, or I feel as. Grammatically impossible. I feel like angry. I feel that upset. I feel as disappointed. Grammatically impossible. So drop the that, the as, the like. Takes discipline, and you'll have to help each other because you'll do it all the time. Because unfortunately, in English, we use the words I feel to both describe a feeling and a thought. I feel that you're not committed is a thought. And that's the problem. And then the last thing that I'll say about the example with Andy and me, that you might recall that in addition to when you do this, I feel that. And I'm telling you this because my intent in telling you is the reason I want you to know this, the outcome I'm hoping for. Because if you don't tell them, they'll make that up. Remember, in the absence of data? So I'm telling you this because I really value our relationship, and the fact that I'm annoyed, worries me about what that will mean going forward. And by the way, silence is good. We all learned that last year, didn't we? If you're doing something that is harming me, harming our relationship, harming our team, harming our family, then, and I don't say anything, I am essentially saying it's okay for you to keep doing it.
This is such a powerful note for us to end on. In many ways, I wanted to connect it. We have a family in day next week, and your example about your husband. This is true in personal relationships with family, with partners, with parents, with kids, colleagues, managers, reports. And I would say, I've been practicing not crossing the net for many, many years. I'm not saying I'm doing it because I sometimes I find myself, crossing the net violently in a not good way, and then I run myself back. But it's been one of the most powerful constructs I've been able to practice. One thing I do I hear myself telling myself that, and then I start unwinding it back, and it's extremely powerful. And I hope everybody ends with this notion, whether it's your family life, your work life, it's powerful in any aspect. Carole, this has been such an amazing session. I can go on and on. I haven't even covered half of what I wanted to cover because this is so powerful. At the same time, there is a lot to practice. And there's the book. So one for everybody. All the books actually are gone at this point, and we're going to try and get more, which is awesome. So for folks who are going to the link, all of them are gone. We're going to try and get more, but don't wait for that additional. Just go and get it and spread the word. Carole, thank you so much for being part of the speaker series. We had close to 800 people, which is awesome, and many will watch it later. I really enjoyed our conversation. I've learned a lot, as always. It's always been an amazing learning process for me with you. So I want to give you a big round of applause. Maybe it's virtual, you hear me, but I'm sure many others are clapping at the same time. Thank you, everybody who tuned in today. Remember to go to go/speaker series to get a copy of the book, share it, connect. And if you haven't done so already, share this with your peers. And we will see you all next time for our next speaker series. Thank you so much, Carole.